And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I accidentally hit stop streaming. I apologize for all of that. But we are still continuing with this fourth segment. I am not done yet. And we are going to talk about the Doc Rivers coaching experience. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is because Doc Rivers said something really interesting after losing in a blowout loss to the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz they came back against the Bucks in a win, and I would like to talk about that because Doc Rivers recently said, quote, "Gotta make those shots," end quote. And that was the result, and that was the reason why they lost. Essentially throwing his team under the bus is what that feels like. And I want to talk about the Doc Rivers coaching experiment and like the experience of him coaching. But before I begin, I want to say that Doc Rivers, great basketball mind, much respect to him for being able to coach the teams he has coached, and he even won a championship, so I have nothing but respect for people like that. But I simply cannot deny facts or series of events that happen under his watch, which is what I'm going to be talking about. So why am I talking about this? Again, because of that quote. He said, "Gotta make those shots," essentially throwing his team under the bus. In my personal opinion, that's what it feels like. If my coach says that, I would think he's throwing me under the bus. I thought this quote was funny because he's acting like his decisions and him coaching isn't a problem whatsoever. Might I remind you, the team has only won one game under his watch, and they've lost 3 of the games under his watch, one of them being a blown lead. And that's the reason why I'm going to include this segment, because of the Bucks and their current position with Doc Rivers as this coach. So, why? Why does he only have 1 win under his belt? Let's dive into this segment. So, we have to go back in time, however, to Doc Rivers' first coaching experience when he started his career with the Orlando Magic. Just in time for when T-Mac decides to sign with the Orlando Magic in free agency. They also had Grant Hill. However, he succumbed to injuries, but there was a lot of expectations from this Magic team, and there was a lot of good things being talked about this Magic team. He was talked up as being one of the best shooting guards in the league at the time, T-Mac, and Grant Hill was also been talked as being one of the best small forwards in the league at the time. Might not be the best team, but they were still a good team. Under Doc Rivers, T-Mac became an all-star and one of the league's most elite scorers. Being 6'8" and playing the shooting guard position, he became one of the first players who was what we would call oversized for his position, and one of those positionless players before he was a positionless player. Because he's 6'8", he could do everything on the offensive side of the ball, and this didn't go unnoticed by Kobe Bryant. Kobe said in a quote, "He's the hardest player I've ever had to guard," end quote. And nobody's going to doubt Kobe Bryant and his ridiculous basketball mind. Obviously, with how good T-Mac is in the regular season, you'd expect that to happen in the postseason, right? Well, now, in the first 2 years of T-Mac and Doc, in the postseason resulted in 2 first-round exits. The series went to best-of-5 games at the time instead of best-of-7, up until Doc's last year on the Orlando Magic, which is honestly just a little bit unlucky on his part. So if that season had happened last year, if the 2003 season had happened last year, then Doc Rivers would have made it to the second round with the Orlando Magic. Because in 2003, the Magic were up 3-1 against the Pistons. And obviously, well, not obvious if you weren't paying attention at the time, the Magic blew a 3-1 series lead to that Pistons team. This is the first of many 3-1 leads that Doc Rivers has blown. After this absolute collapse in the postseason, the Magic had enough of him and decided that he needed to go somewhere else and that he needed to be fired. So then, after his tenure with the Magic, he decides to get a job with the Boston Celtics. And now that they already had Paul Pierce on the roster, but it wasn't a championship team yet until 2007 rolled around for Doc Rivers. This is arguably the best team that Doc Rivers has ever coached. Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, along with their very underrated point guard in Rajon Rondo. The first year that they played with each other, they won a championship. It was the first instance of a super team with a big three. It was the first instance of like a very stacked team with elite players on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. They beat their long-term rivals in the Lakers in the postseason, giving Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Ray Allen their first titles, as well as Doc Rivers getting his first title. Everything seemed great for him, but if you think there's more success coming, you're absolutely wrong. The next season, they make it to the second round, but then they run into the Orlando Magic. I don't know if you remember, but the Orlando Magic used to be the team that Doc coached. And now this Magic team had DPOY Dwight Howard. This is who is the second coming of Superman. Shaq isn't going to like hearing that, but that's essentially what he was. But they were up 3-2 in that series. Despite not having Kevin Garnett, they were up 3-2 in the series, and it looked like Boston was going to have this series in the bag, but they ended up losing to the Orlando Magic. And if they lost, like, the idea was that they were up 3-2, and if they lost to the Orlando Magic at home, because the Orlando Magic played at home, then it was fine, because then they'd go into Game 7 and they'd win in their home court. But that didn't happen. They were unlucky because Kevin Garnett was injured in this series, so it was just seen as a pass for Doc, because it's not really fair when your roster's been injured. Big deal. And they run it back, beating LeBron and the Magic to make it back to the finals, where they rematch their rivals, the Lakers. Once again, they went up 3-2, and it was starting to look like the only reason they didn't three-peat was because of an injury. But as you all know, we know what happens. They went and they blew the 3-2 series lead with Kobe shooting 6 of 24 and 0 for 6 from 3 in Game 7. That is horrible. Kobe was just chucking the ball up in the air and practically giving you that opportunity to win. But it didn't happen because of what they will later find out of Doc Rivers. That's the reason. But I digress, because as of right now, to the point of his career where he was on the Celtics, nobody really thought that Doc Rivers was the problem. He made the finals 2 out of his 3 years, and that is not bad whatsoever for his team. So the team decides to run it back. But if you guys remember what I said about the Boston Celtics beating LeBron that last year, after that series, LeBron got pretty angry and decided to be the bad guy and decided to sign with the Miami Heat in free agency. He should have won the MVP that year, but he didn't because people were still upset at him for joining Miami. And with that big three in Miami, the Celtics stood absolutely no chance in the series, losing in 5 games. LeBron was on an absolute mission to get to get to the finals, to get his ring, and they had no chance against LeBron. And for the rest of LeBron's career in the Eastern Conference, he would turn the Celtics into his child, and he would kick them out of the playoffs every single year whenever he wanted to. That's just LeBron. And that's exactly what happened to Doc and the Celtics for 2 straight years. 2 straight years. He lost to the greatest basketball player ever, LeBron James. Yes, he's the greatest basketball player ever. And in the final year, they lost to the Knicks. And that was probably the breaking point for Doc with the Celtics. Oh my gosh, I lost to the Knicks. And that would end up being his last year with the Celtics. And obviously, Doc must have had nightmares thinking about going against LeBron in the postseason every single time. So he decides to take up a tenure and coach the Clippers. Now, obviously, like, just jokes about LeBron, but you know what LeBron does to his opponents in the Eastern Conference, especially when he was in his prime. This is arguably the most infamous tenure of Doc Rivers in his coaching career. He coached one of the biggest what-if stories in Lob City, Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan, along with six-man Jamal Crawford, just to name a few great basketball players. Call it bad luck, call it bad ball. We all know what ends up happening with this Clippers team. Now, the first year of the coach wasn't that bad. Losing to Kevin Durant in the second round with the Thunder and prime Russ isn't really easy, and because of this, nobody really felt any sort of suspicions towards Doc as their coach until the next season came along. So let's talk about next season. They were up 3-1, and before I go into this season, I should mention how Doc Rivers leads his team to great regular seasons. He does this every single time. So being good in the regular season for Doc is expected. But I'm focusing more on the playoffs here. So in these playoffs, again, they had a great regular season. They were up 3-1. This was the second time that Doc held a 3-1 series lead, and he didn't end up getting the last laugh. In Game 6, the score was 102-94. The Clippers had the lead with 6 minutes left. They went scoreless from this point up until the 16-second mark of this game, where they left the score 116-104 with 16 seconds left. That is absolutely horrible ball from the Clippers. That is a complete collapse, and the Clippers never were able to recover from this, losing the series. This is the second time that Doc Rivers has blown a 3-1 lead, and the first loss that made me question whether or not Doc Rivers was actually a good head coach. The Clippers weren't supposed to have a 3-1 series lead to begin with, however, so nobody really thought much of it. I mean, he has a title, but other than that, he's done nothing but disappoint so far. That's another missed opportunity for Doc Rivers. And moving on to next year, we get the exact same story. They do great in the regular season. They nab a good spot in the playoffs, going against the 5th-seeded Portland Trailblazers against Dame. But once the playoffs rolled around, they obviously fell short. They went up 2-0 in the series against Portland, couldn't win a single game after that, and lost the series in 6. That's another missed opportunity because that Portland Trailblazers was known to be a weak team because their defense was notoriously bad, having Damian Lillard there. And that's another missed opportunity. The next year, they decided to run it back. They lost early in the first round again, this time to the Utah Jazz and Gordon Hayward and Rudy Gobert. They lost in 7, but it's still another missed opportunity. The blame wasn't really going for the coach up until this point, however. It was going to the players, particularly Chris Paul. So Doc Rivers was sort of getting saved by some of his players not playing well. So with that in mind, the Clippers decided to blow up Lob City and start a whole rebuild with Doc as their coach. And he decided to participate, and without really expecting it, they made the playoffs, and they took the overpowered Golden State Warriors with Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and DeMarcus Cousins at the time. They took them to 6 games. Sorry, I just need a breather because I've been talking so much. This is well above their expectations, and a lot of people were excited for this team. And the excitement went through the roof when the Clippers got Kawhi and Paul George in the offseason. Now, immediately, everybody expected that this team was going to win a championship with those two. The second that they landed, they had a great regular season in 2020, but we all know what happened in 2020. COVID-19 struck. And once COVID-19 happened, we weren't sure if we were going to get a playoffs or the Battle of LA. But the NBA came together. They made a bubble in which basketball could be played without fans. So it was just pure basketball. And everybody loved it. The Clippers make it all the way to the second round. And they hold a 3-1 series lead again. And it seemed like the Battle of LA was finally going to happen in the Western Conference Finals. But as you know, the Clippers do what the Clippers do, and they just collapse under the pressure. In Game 5, they were up 18 at the half. In Game 6, they were up by 16 at the half. And in Game 7, when there were 4 minutes to go, they were up by 12 at the half. They lost all of these games. It's not like they weren't supposed to have the series lead like the last time. They were the favorites to win it all. And after the loss, the Clippers had had enough of Doc Rivers, as this was the second 3-1 lead that the team has blown under his watch, and the third 3-1 lead that Doc Rivers has ever blown in his entire career, and fired him. This was when the media started to notice the pattern with Doc, and in the postseason, every single time his team chokes when the lights shine the brightest. This was when people started to notice that. However, the excuse for the Clippers was that they played in the bubble. So Doc wasn't even getting that much blame for it. It was just the fact that they were playing in the bubble and there was no fans. But everyone was playing under that exact same stipulation. So it was just excuses piling on and excuses for Doc. Not to mention, to make matters worse, Tyronn Lue comes in as head coach for the Clippers next season, and then takes the Clippers to the Western Conference Finals for the first time without Kawhi being healthy. So that is further adding to Doc Rivers' humiliation and failure as the head coach for the Clippers. And looking for a new job, he decides to take up the coaching spot in Philly to coach Embiid and Ben Simmons. You guys know how much I love Ben Simmons. So Embiid has some of his best seasons under Doc Rivers, at least in the regular season. In the first year that Doc was being head coach for the Sixers, they took the 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. They beat the Wizards in the first round, and then they faced the Atlanta Hawks in the second round, which looked to be an easy win for the Atlanta Hawks. Well, not the Atlanta Hawks, but for the Sixers. But then this series became most infamous for the downfall of Ben Simmons. And this was the series when Ben Simmons passed up a wide-open layup. We've seen it. Everyone has seen it. Trae Young was defending him in the paint, and Ben Simmons saw that, immediately made the pass to somebody else closer to him in the corner. I have no idea what he was doing. I have no idea what he was thinking. Like, Trae Young is a toddler compared to Ben Simmons, 6'10" compared to 6'1". Obviously, there's a huge height difference. I don't know why he just didn't go up. It was terrible. And once Doc Rivers was able to deflect a lot of the blame onto Ben because of how bad he was in the series and just how much of a liability he is in general, the entire team threw Ben under the bus. Not just the coach. The entire team threw Ben under the bus. And he deserved it. He 100% deserved to be thrown under the bus. But that's what the team did, and Doc Rivers avoided getting blamed for it. And you guys know how I feel about Ben Simmons. I cannot stand him. And that series was the driving force as to why I can't stand him. He has no drive. And so Doc avoids getting blamed for this. But if you think the disappointments end here, then we're not done yet. The next year, Ben Simmons decides to not want to play for Philly, so he decides to cry and to leave and to cause drama to the point where he gets traded to Brooklyn. So help me God for James Harden. And now, James Harden absolutely... Now that they have James Harden, there's zero excuses for this Philly team. They have all the pieces that they need. All they have to do is execute. They matched up against the Heat in 2020. They tied the series 2-2. However, James Harden failed to show up in the final 2 games. Harden has a history of as well as not performing well in these games. And he was playing like as if Ben Simmons never left. He was playing like he was extremely passive with no heart. Didn't look like he wanted the team to go far whatsoever. He wasn't doing anything to contribute to the team. Embiid didn't play well in that final game either, getting a box score of -29 in Game 6 and losing by 35 points. This was a competitive series, and the takeaway was, okay, Harden just needs to play better and they win this series. So they run it back. Again, in 2023. And it should also be noted that Joel Embiid is playing through injuries in these playoff series. That also doesn't necessarily help them. So they run it back in 2023. They take the series to 3-2. Again, another series lead. All they have to do is win 1 game at home, and they have it in the bag. What do? Lose in Game 7. In an absolute embarrassment, Harden and Embiid were playing in the Boston Celtics home court, and just watching them play, they weren't even looking to score. They were just looking to get fouled and hoping that they can get to the line, and it wasn't working. Like, they were just flailing their bodies around, expecting for fouls in Game 7, but the fouls weren't getting resulted. And because of that, Harden only ended with 9 points, and Joel Embiid only ended with 15 points. It was a complete choke job from both of them. They kept doing the exact same thing over and over and over and over again, expecting something different, all the while Doc was just sitting there and watching, not making any kind of adjustments whatsoever, which is what the head coach of a team should do. And this was the last straw for Philly as they ended up firing him after that disgusting performance from the entire team. And there you have it, the Doc Rivers experience, full of nothing but disappointment. Now, what's to be expected from the Bucks, given everything that I said? Probably more disappointment. I don't know if it's just bad luck or, like, I don't know if it's him, but like he just can't close games out. He can't close series out. And it's like the excuse that he always comes up with is that my players just don't end up hitting the shots at the end. Well, no, you need to make the adjustments. You are the coach. That is what you're supposed to do. Now that he is the coach of the Bucks, no surprise, they aren't doing anything in the regular season. So imagine what's going to happen in the playoffs. Again, I mentioned earlier, 1-3 with Doc Rivers. That is really bad, given how with Adrian Griffin, a coach that they didn't like, they were doing much better with him. It's unbelievable. And the audacity that he has to come at his players for like, gotta make those shots. Well, why don't you just adjust to them not making shots to boost their confidence? That's what a good coach does. Like, if they aren't making them, it's your job to make the adjustments and to help them win. You can't just stick to a game plan if it's not working. That is the definition of insanity. But I digress. He doesn't know how to call timeouts. He doesn't know how to run plays. And all he does is pray to God that his players can hit his shots. If you can't adjust to when your team doesn't play like how they usually play, you shouldn't be a coach. In my personal opinion, it's unacceptable. I watch him do nothing on the sideline, and it infuriates me. It's like looking at Darvin Ham trying to be a coach, honestly. Yes, I made that comparison. Yes, I did. It's infuriating for me to watch. And it's just, I sort of wanted to just put that out there in this segment because given how the Bucks are playing now, I don't have much hope for them coming in this playoffs. I don't. I really don't. But with that, we are out of time for the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review in it. Really makes a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram for more content and updates. And do not forget to click the link in the description below to tip and to donate. Really helps myself between the show host and you guys, the viewers. The link is displayed in the ticker, as you can see. And I will say it again, streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. I'm your host, Nelson. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful day. And as always, take care.